This session is put together by Katja Meyer and me. I don't have to present Katja Meyer anymore, I guess. Her background is in science and technology studies, as is mine. I'm Astrid Mager. I'm working at the Institute of Technology Assessment at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And I'm also co-chairing the ÖAW-Kommission. This is an initiative on digital technologies and democracy, together with Barbara Preinsack, which has a lot of overlap with this topic as well. The title of today's session is From Pessimism to Promise, Practices of Digital Inclusion from the Global South to Europe. Please come in. Yeah, it's quite some people. I'm happy. So this session has basically three premises and two main goals. As I said, I'm in science and technology studies, so for us technology is never neutral, it's never neutrally developed and then implemented into society, but it is rather developed in society. Social values shaping technologies, its political agendas, its economic interests. I think this is nothing new after the day we had, but I would still like to emphasize that. So it's really a sociopolitical construct we're dealing with. Second, which has also become visible in many of the sessions before, but I would like to more explicitly spell it out, the situatedness of digital technology and digital practices. This is something we would like to address in this session most particularly, because we will be having speakers from very different situated perspectives. The situatedness helps us sort of put the finger on the locality of the practices. It's a notion borrowed from Donna Haraway, who initially said, well, there is no knowledge that is not situated, but it's rather coming from somewhere. It's also partial, and it's highly important to consider also the context and the speaker. If it's about knowledge, and also with the digital practices, it's important in what context they are embedded. That could be cultural context, political context, or also organizational contexts, if you think about welfare states, for example, and other organizations. So the situatedness is important. And the third thing is that the future is not waiting ahead of us. So it's not simply happening. That's our third premise, but it's rather made. It's actively made in our everyday activities and political decision-making processes. So it is something that could also be otherwise, which is also a very important aspect for this session. So this opens the possibility to intervene as well, to think of the future as something that is constantly made and remade and reconfigured. So what is important is that the future also is not something that is ahead of us and disconnected to the present, but it's rather impacting on the present. So the way we think about the future impacts the way we act in present-day decision-making processes. So that is why it's important to look at the future at all. So those are the three premises, and then we have two main aims with this session. The first one is to shift our focus from pessimism to promise, and to train ourselves in hopeful thinking, which is not always easy considering the circumstances, but we still try to focus on the optimistic side and have examples also how to reimagine the future and therefore also rebuild digital futures or socio-digital futures. So this is one of the main aims. We are also very much looking forward to your examples and questions, so we are really also trying to engage a lot in this session. And second, to also broaden our view beyond the Eurocentristic view and the Anglo-American view. We've heard a lot about, now we know everything about US-American big tech, increasingly China as well. But there is lots of other countries out there and contexts and cultures. So what we'd like to do is to bring together very different viewpoints and examples that may help us to reimagine the future for the better, so to think about more inclusive, more participatory, more just digital technologies and practices in the future. So the title of this session is borrowed from Payal Aurora's book that is called From Pessimism to Promise, Lessons from the Global South on Designing Inclusive Tech. So we take on this invitation to shift this focus from pessimism to promise. We have three wonderful speakers I will briefly introduce now. We will then have Payal's keynote on the book to set the tone of like positive, more optimistic, more hopeful thinking about digital technology and practices and AI also. And then we will have two more presenters, Gilberto Vieira from Rio de Janeiro and Juliane Jacke from Graz, who will also talk about their own research and then respond to Payal's presentation. And then we would like to have a brief panel discussion and open up the discussion to also engage the audience. We are very curious about also what your hopeful ideas are about the digital future. Payal Arora is professor of inclusive AI cultures at Utrecht University and founder of the Inclusive AI Lab that has its main goal to think about and also try to foster more inclusive AI cultures together with the majority world. She has written numerous books, special issues, journal articles, and whatnot. Most importantly, The Next Billion Users with Harvard University Press and From Pessimism to Promise with MIT. Something which is quite exceptional. She has held more than 350 keynotes in 85 countries, which is quite a lot in my view. And her work is also creating impact, not least in international media outlets and also in the policy work. Payal is currently living in Amsterdam, which is also important to mention, where we are located actually. She has worked a lot with and in different cultures in the Global South, most importantly also in India. Gilberto Vieira is a research activist, co-founder of the NGO Data Labe, that's creating data narratives from below together with residents in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. So they're trying to produce data that is relevant to the people on the ground. He also holds a PhD in urban management from PUCPR, and he's also part of the Urban Technopolitics Laboratory. He has been visiting researcher at the Weizenbaum Institute in Germany and the Harman Writer in Residence program at the City University of New York. And he has also published numerous articles and chapters on urban technopolitics, the data citizen generation, and peripheral activism in national and international outlets, with a particular focus also on Brazilian data activism. Last but not least, Juliane Jacke is professor of digital societies at the University of Graz. Her research intersects feminist SDS, critical data studies, and future studies. She has also published and written multiple books and co-edited special issues and so forth. I name particularly two, Algorithmic Regimes, Methods, Interactions, and Politics with Amsterdam University Press, and Dialogues in Data Power Shifting Responsibilities in a Datafied World with Bristol University Press. And Juliane is also co-organizer of the Data Power Conference series that is happening in different places, including also in Bangalore, India, and it's supposed to be in Mexico the next time. So she has also ties to the Global South, but also like is working in the European context. So what we have and what we would like to do is to bring together these different perspectives and discuss what could we learn in terms of reimagining better digital future from the different contexts, where are differences, where is also common ground, what are the challenges, and maybe the way ahead. So we will see where this will get us. So I would like to give the floor to Payal first for your keynote.
That's right. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see. Oh. So, living in the Netherlands, I avoid podiums because I'm already short. So, I need some sort of, this is going to be a self help forum, right? So, thank you, Astrid, for this generous introduction. And I know it's a last session. You're going to be boiling to death. So, somehow we have to make this count. So, we're ready for a performance, right? Okay, great. So, all right. So the last few years before I write, what got me to write this book is because, you know, over the years, I started to see a disturbing trend between, the West becoming increasingly pessimistic to a point of paralysis, like a sort of a sense of deep impotence, whereas the rest of the world was becoming increasingly optimistic about not just their futures, about technology, about climate crisis. And, you would think, okay, what the hell is going on, right? This sort of divide, because this is even more concerning because the much of our major problems we face today are global in nature, right? Think about it: climate crisis. We need peace around the region, right? The whole geopolitics is shifting, and so with all this, from the climate to social, peace, and basically in terms of regulation across board with data, etc., why aren't we getting on the same page if we are in very two different points? And this is not a kumbaya talk saying, hey everyone, just smile and you'll feel better. No, it's about the idea that pessimism, as a mindset, can actually architect the way in which we act, the way in which we think, the kinds of questions you ask. Because if you're afraid, you're coming from a point of fear, you will say, in what ways can I protect myself? How can I prevent my children from using AI? How can I secure us? So it becomes very much driven from fear, anxieties, and then you will move in a very different pathway from the rest of the world, right? So this really matters to get on the same page and also understand why is a majority world, which technically should be more depressed, right? They're far more, socioeconomically precarious, right? They're at the forefront of the climate crisis. They will be disproportionately impacted. They should be much more optimistic and much more pessimistic than countries like the US, that is one of the richest in the world. So it doesn't make sense. So hence the book. So my argument here is pessimism is a privilege for those who can afford to despair. The rest of the world is pragmatic in the way in which they see technology as a tool to tackling some of the most confounding problems we face today, right? And also, it really matters where you're situated, as Astrid underlines, because to some and majority of the people in the global south, actually their lives have gotten better compared to their lived realities when they use AI. And I will give you some points, right? So, but let's look at the media discourse in the West, right? Articles upon articles over the years, and it continues to be so, is that AI is creating an existential threat. It's taking away our jobs. The future of AI is war. We're getting concerned about, how that design is getting deeply what do you call it, deeply depressing, and how actually you can actually be capitalized on those emotions of despair to become even more commodified and even more instrumentalized for the big tech. And Geert Loving, who's a self-proclaimed pessimist, keeps inviting me to his very depressing talks, and he loves this sort of like back and forth with me. And I was just saying that one of the audience members asked him, so I've been following your work, and you've been doing all this alternative tech for so many years in the Netherlands. He said, yeah, I do. 25 years, I've spent my entire life on this. And she said, so do you have any hopes and dreams for our Dutch system? He said, no. It was a total waste of my time. I was like, dude, like, that's really not very helpful, is it? Anyway, but that's here. And, Zuboff surveillance capitalism has become like a default. When we think about surveillance, it's basically oppressive. It's all about how capitalist systems are extractive. In fact, the average kid today, like in the school and universities, are talking about tech as extractive. It's understood. Technology is extractive, is exclusionary, is basically oppressive. It's an understood, correlated notion, right? And so here, capitalism also gets sort of like imbibed because it has become the Americanization of thinking about surveillance systems, right? To the rest of the world, which if you tell a post-communist country about this, a post-communist country, people there, they like capitalism because, even in India, I'm from India, capitalism was very different for us. It basically is a push against this extraordinarily paternalistic state. And guess what? Less than 14% of the entire world, okay, have liberal democracies. We are not trying to fight the market, we're trying to fight the state which doesn't give us opportunities, which doesn't give us, much chance, who is deeply like ruled by 70 plus year olds. And you have the youngest nations, right? From Africa to South Asia. So in comparison, actually sometimes big tech can be their friends. And I'll give you an example, right? So this Americanization of surveillance capitalism as a correlation is spreading across board. You have, algorithms of oppression, which talk about how algorithms, basically are intrinsically oppressive. And yet it doesn't seem to explain Black Lives Matter, right? Um, well, if it's oppressive, why did it actually promote these kinds of movements, right? Me Too movement. You can't, pick and choose. You can't have an argument that suits your convenience and then actually dismiss the smaller inconvenient data, right? Which actually is in a very different space of digital activism. So it is important because when you start to see technologies as intrinsically evil in many ways, oppressive, etc., then you talk about resisting these technologies, refusing these technologies, and asking the ones who are the most, impacted, often communities, saying, what you need is alternative tools. Best of luck. While we all are on Teams having our meetings and Zoom and our smartwatches and our smartphones, we propose, for an alternative tech to the rest of the world, right? So, and then of course, we ask these sort of rhetorical questions which we already have an answer to, so we can preach to the choir in this sort of what I call by the doomsday divas, right? Because we know pessimism sells. It just does. And cognitively, we as human beings respond to pessimism because fear is so much more compelling a mode to action than hope, because hope requires us to do work. It requires us to understand that we live in a messy reality, but you have to sort of understand what is it that gets you driving, gets you moving. And that's too much work. It's easier to just hate and be afraid and be fearful, right? And so, hence, we propose this. And we create so much of anxiety across board that we really, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then you can say, hey, don't you worry, I'm here to come up with a new set of solutions for you, right? Which will, protect us from the evils. So as you can see, while the Americans and, those in the West, like, despair, India, Kenya, Brazil, Pakistan, Mexico, across board have very different attitudes towards AI. They're much more optimistic, right? More than 9 in 10 young people in Kenya, Mexico, again, are much more optimistic about their futures. Technology and the futures go hand in hand, right? And you may say, yeah, but that's just their mindset because they're not really using it. Actually, they are. Because when you have that kind of attitude, you start to play with technologies. If you think technology is not for you, you don't play with it, right? But if you see it as a new space that you want to discover, you start to play. So you have India, Indonesia, that have already talked about how it's impacting workplace productivity. And I'll give you an example. My cousin sister, she handles all this sort of outsourcing material for small, like she's a small outfit in Delhi, and She gets like Australian gigs for ads, and she has to like modify it and do basically a back end office, right? And she said it's transformed her life because her small little company of 10 people now can focus on content because their quality of work has gone up. Because before they spent much of their budget on the right accent, and they didn't have many gigs because you can't, you had to get people who have an Australian accent and an American accent and also the Texan accent, maybe. Now, with AI, accents don't matter. Instantly, you can actually communicate. Also, you can use AI to tailor it on the American cultural norms, the phrases, or Australian, or even Japanese or Middle Eastern. So now she has, yes, a variety of gigs coming from many different countries. They can take it up, and now what they've done is they're proposing added value of co-shaping the content itself. And this happened within the first 3 months of the release of AI. And I remember her telling me, yeah, we're really afraid, but it's super exciting. And people are like, oh, we feel so schizophrenic. How can we feel fearful, and how can we feel hopeful and afraid? Well, because we're human. We have the capacity to have a spectrum of human emotions. So deal with it, embrace it. That's what's beautiful. Human is we are beautiful in our contradiction, right? And so moving forward. Anyway, so basically, what I yeah, and a long session. So what I'm proposing here is that we need to think in terms of, I propose a few things. One is algorithms of oppression. People are like, but why, right? Still, I don't get why there's such a dichotomy between the West and the rest, between those who are optimistic and pessimistic. Well, for starters, it's just that the fact that they're young. I mean, let's not underestimate that 90% of the entire world's population lives in the global south. And if you remember what you were like as a teenager, you're just much more open to new things. You play with technology, you discover it, right? And if you are in the global south, where usually parents don't talk to you about, or you're in very conservative societies, which by the way is the norm, right? And including in Europe, by the way, when we talk about the mobile bans, right, like the social media bans, we have an ideal family, for example, an ideal school in mind, right? So we're like, oh, parents need to protect their kids. So I'm assuming these caring parents towards these children, and I have this like lovely picture of a typical family life. Guess what? Majority of us don't get that kind of family. That's a fictional family. Many of them are, single moms or too busy, or they come from broken homes, or they're refugees, or they're feeling really bullied in school, and for the 100 reasons why they feel super alone and unsupported by their parents. In fact, they may need to even escape their parents because of abuse at home. So why do we romanticize, a family unit, a school unit, like as if the children are just so happy in school. And if only the teachers, who are obviously really wonderful, will like really provide that environment, and technology is a problem, right? We're telling ourselves this, we're kidding ourselves, because the reality is this fear is less about AI and it's more about us, that the fact is social institutions today, whether it's higher education, whether it's the healthcare system, is working only for a tiny minority of the entire world. So when we're like, oh, we need to preserve copyright for creativity, who is benefiting from that? Most creatives in the world have never benefited from copyright. And screw copyright. As an academic, I wouldn't give all my academic books away because I get like €1 sometimes from Sage. I'm like, thank you. I'm not going to claim it because I'm not going to file your 5 pages of forms for the taxes for €1. So, we have romanticized that kind of system, right? So this is what is, they're young, they have the aptitude, and their lives are actually significantly better with technologies because they weren't able to access, right, educational material. So, for example, in their own language and dialect, what's very interesting is majority of the kind of questions we're asking if you're a teenager is, am I a freak? You're not asking, gee, I want to really know more about data sovereignty, or I want to read about the history of blah, blah, blah. No, I don't. I want to know, like, when I masturbate, am I going to die? You know, when I kiss a boy, did I just get pregnant? You know, and nobody's talking. I'm from India. I was brought up by an educated family, very liberal, but we didn't talk about it. None of it. I learned about sex from a porn magazine, right? From a bad girl who circulated it. And I actually got suspended from school, by the way, for 3 months for witnessing an impure act of someone kissing, right? So actually I had that. So this is my background, and not much has changed. Think about the girls in Afghanistan, where you are not even allowed to go to school, you're not allowed to go to public space. And so in relation to that, picture a conversation, say, hey, don't you worry when you get on ChatGPT or Claude trying to learn that your data is being extracted and you're making big tech rich? Just imagine that conversation, right? Or picture in 65 countries, homosexuality is banned many places to the point of death. If you're in Yemen, you are including in Gaza, which is illegal, right? In many of the countries, 65 countries, it is illegal, right? So if you're a kid who happens to have these, tendencies, you want to ask, and guess who's going to tell you you're pretty normal? Is AI. It's going to tell you much more and humanize you much more than your community, your friends, your parents, and that matters. So whether it's that, whether it is, I guess we should just give up on this, right? So, anyway, I had some visual examples, but so that's basically is that we have to understand that these are kids who have seen, like we did a 4-year study in Namibia, right? And we saw that these kids, they're a young democracy, they're just emerging, and 65% of them are unemployed. So they use AI to cope with their mental health. They joke, they share these, they create these visuals, and they share it on social media. And they actually sometimes have a full-blown conversation because they are lonely, but they also have the dignity. They don't tell their family or friends. And mental health is a taboo thing. You don't reach out to therapists. So, we've got to picture. And people are like, yeah, but that's the global south. Yes, but there's also another side to this, and this is about then how to reclaim, techno-optimism, is that things are changing. The global south is not where it used to be, right? So I'm giving you these dark stories about women, whether it's in Iran, who basically take away their parda and stand up. Why? Because it's not that they lack the literacies of high risks, and wow, another no, because they believe and they're so extraordinarily hopeful that even if they die, it was for a good cause, that they've somehow contributed to a movement that will push them forward. That is a kind of raw courage that is architecting entire societies. So this is why I talk about it being a privilege, because people are making a choice. I've done this for 2 decades of research, and it is baffling to me about the kind of courage. Why do teenagers in Saudi Arabia, there was a beautiful study by a friend of mine, who basically did this a study of these teenage girls doing YouTube fashion shows at the heart of the morality police in Saudi Arabia. Now it's much more liberal, so to speak. But this was at that time where you could actually get imprisoned for years. And yet they went on. So you're like, are you out of your mind? Why would you do something like this? Just like what's happening in Iran. It's because human dignity is an extraordinary force. And people are always making relative choices. We don't make ideal choices. But academia, we profess ideal types. We need to have these ideal conditions and be like, this is how it is. Because we don't sit at the decision-making table, right? Very few of us. Whereas the reality is, most of the world operates, actually we all operate within a system of constraints. Some are just much more extraordinary than others. And so in relation to that, like for example in Iran, the largest and the longest internet shutdown in the history right? So you can say, oh, big tech is evil. Here's a case where big tech. Are Iranians stupid? No, they're not. They're just thinking that, hang on, the ITU that stands for human rights just bought into the argument by the Islamic regime that claimed state sovereignty. So please request Starlink to disable their internet connectivity in Iran during the internet shutdown. And what did ITU do? You're right. Check box. We do talk about national sovereignty. So yes, you're right. So they did send the request, and Elon Musk says, screw you, right? Like, whatever. And did the Iranians say, oh my God, bad Elon Musk? No. They're like, yes, we get he's a pathological creature, but thank you, Elon Musk, because if it wasn't for him, they would not be able to get online. So, you know, we've got to look at the situation of why do people make these choices, and not because of the usual suspects, oh, they lack the literacy. We need to provide better literacies, or that they're not there yet. And, okay, so I'm really very good now. And then the last thing I want to say before I just hand it over is, how do we move forward? Because people are like, okay, yes, but I don't really get the global south, and they are such a context so far removed, because these contexts are pretty, like, really, you know, a lived reality apart. But I want us to turn it around, because things have changed a lot, even in the last decade. Mobile internet used to be the most expensive in the world in most parts of the global south a decade ago. Today, it's the cheapest in the world. The countries with the top cheapest mobile internet is in Vietnam, Cambodia, India, you know, name it, Nigeria, etc. Right? I'm not saying that people are not unconnected. Of course there's still digital divide issues, but it's changed. It's cheaper in India than here, the data plans and mobile phones, right? Or, for example, renewable energy. China is a decade or so ahead, right? And before we go into the whole fixation of China, actually East Asia is already a decade ahead in fintech, while Americans are still writing checks, right? I mean, and yet okay, what's the dream of Elon Musk, the epitome of innovation? 4X, he wants it to be a WeChat, right? Which is a decade ago. And the last example is that this was the opening of an international film festival in Amsterdam, and these creatives are like, oh my God, we're really grappling about the future of short-form video with the age of AI. Is it to destroy the entire short-form video? And they're like, what do we do about it? Meantime, it's a €2 billion industry in China. It's an entire new industry. So we keep talking about the future of work, how we need to futuring in Europe. Just look in the global south, the future is now there, right? So it's not like the backward nations that need to be, you know, taught, and yet you have policies in Europe which say, oh, we're going to design AI tools and then apply it in Africa and Asia. And then like, actually, no, thank you. We don't want your European tools because we don't even fit our context and conditions. We need data-like tools. We need tools that work offline. We need tools that are actually energy efficient, and you need to learn from us. If you care so much about your climate and data centers, how about looking at the global south that we are making lean, agile, data-like tools that you should use so you can care about the climate and actually do it not by following the Americans and becoming American-like, right? And so I think that really matters. And here's a very promising last example is the Eurostack, which is the digital public infrastructure of Europe, is emulating the India stack, which is basically pioneered a couple of years ago with a fraction of resources that Europeans have, which Europe has been trying to do for decades and have failed. And now they've sucked up and they're doing it. But how many academics are doing research on that? Almost none. We're going to have the same problems. We're going to just invent our own problems. Well, I sit on the Indian government board, and for the last 4 years, we have been tackling small but issues like clinks of why certain things are not working, and we're fixing the loopholes of the digital public infrastructure. But are the Europeans asking us about what we've learned? Are they reading our reports? They're not. They're going to do their own pure mistakes, and this is where we're at. This is why
Much for pushing it through, also without the slides and without the mic and everything. I hope people in the back could hear it. I was wondering, do you think the power will be on for the next time, or should people move more to the front in case it disappears? Pardon me? Okay, all right. So we just see what's going to happen next. I will give the mic now that it's working again.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Payal, for this so inspiration talk. And this really inspires me. And what I was provoked to do here is just trying to connect a little bit my work and my research with this amazing research on Payal. And I think I'll do it. But one thing when I listen in Payal to talk is the most. Okay. Okay, you can see me for the rest of the time. Thank you, man. And the first reference that I want to bring you, and it comes to me when I listen to Pavel, is it's a indigenous philosopher from Brazil called Ailton Krenak, and he has a famous book called Ideas for Postpone the End of the World. And I think when I listen in these ideas of Paul, and I'll talk a little bit about my work, I think everything that we listened since yesterday with the film that we saw and all the discussions that we had today is, for me, the question that is how I will and us, how we'll postpone this end of the world, you know? How we will inhabit this time of catastrophe. And inhabitant here is not live, it's not stay in the catastrophe. It's move on these situations, you know, as Chin Ingold says, if we could get some philosophers here as Krenak, as Chin Ingold, or Isabel Stenges that talk about how can we live, how can we stay in this catastrophe time. So starting from here, I want to talk to you about my work in Brazil. So since 20 years ago, I started to work with the narratives about people who live in favelas. And this narrative is also made by the mainstream media through some lens of deprivation, of violence, and I don't know, I don't need to talk about this with you. And we started to think about how can we, as people who lives in the peripheries, in the favelas of these big countries in the south, how can we figure out this lack of narratives, of information, of official information about ourselves? And we work a lot on alternative media, alternative journalism, alternative ways to make narratives. But despite the alternative media, there was a force that came to us, and us is me and my friends and my partners in work in the favelas, that is the power of data and the production of truth about these territories and its inhabitants. So we started to think about if we territorialize data, and Astrid talked a lot about situated data, and we start to think about it. If we racialize data, because there's a problem in Brazil, and I think it's a problem in the majority world and all the global south, that is, we don't produce data about everything yet, you know? And when I come to Europe, I always say, oh, we have this project that we count every trees in the streets. And I say, oh my God, in Brazil we don't have even good data about sanitation. And we started to think, if we that live the problems start to produce data about ourselves, and we start to think about some method that we started to call citizen data generation. And in partnership with universities and some actors in the state, we start to produce data and produce narrative about ourselves. And we started to think that with this work, we could I don't know, maybe postpone the end of the world that we faced every time. And that these people that lives in favela are faced since ever, because we are faced through the violence since ever. So we started to look to ourselves, to the people who lives in these territories, through not the lens of deprivation, but the lens of power, of force, of potentiality. So when I listen Payal talking about algorithms of aspiration, or how can we could think technology more as a humanity way, I think that we can also, Payal, think technology not as a tool, but as a politic. And I want to ask to us here to debate, how can we stop viewing technology as a tool used by politics and starts viewing politics as a technological structure? And it's changed a little bit, the thing, because that's what we are trying to do in the favelas of Brazil. How can we think about the politics, about the public policies that are made or not made by us through these tools, to these technologies, to this coloniality of data, through this surveillance? And it's kind of pessimistic, because we are facing the end of the world, we are facing the catastrophe, but we are inhabit it, and inhabit it as a movement, you know? So what we are trying to do, and now as the biggest philosopher that I want to cite every time, that is Paulo Freire from Brazil, is understand the structure and act through it towards emancipation. So how can we emancipate ourselves with these oppressed algorithms, with this surveillance? If we are on the surveillance capitalism, how can we emancipate ourselves through these tools? And what I'm facing in my research, and I have been researching data activism on the peripheries in Latin America, is that maybe we are constructing or imagining another worlds, another ways to live, another ways to face these oppressed structures. So this is the beginning of a discussion. So maybe I want, after my colleague Julian open the talk to discuss with you about these questions, about these possibilities, about these imaginaries of future that is already happening in the Latin America, in the global south. So thank you for having me.
I'm tall enough, I try this. Have I got slides or? Oh, okay. Oh, I can see myself here on that screen. Is that possible? Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so last talk of the day. I really try to keep it brief and give us enough time to then discuss those two really evocative presentations before me. So my starting point is a bit different, as I am based in Graz now. But I start similarly from an observation that there is a lot of pessimism around the ways in which we critique digital technologies and data-driven technologies. So a lot of my work comes from critical data studies. And the question that really comes, what comes after critique, right? How can we use the things that we know and that we've criticized and turn them into something that is turning basically the argument and trying to build something that is desirable for everyone. So what I'll be talking about is some of the work that we are doing in Graz now on participatory futuring and the idea of desirable digital worlds. Astrid already said the future is not something that's fixed, but the future is something that's continuously in the making. and is made through anticipations, through imaginaries, through hypes, that shape discourses around what is thinkable and what is desirable. It is also shaped through technologies that structure our social relations and that shape and co-constitute our worlds. And so the meme on the right-hand side is just one representation of the ways in which the inevitability really around the discourse of artificial intelligence and its impact on many aspects of our life is basically a fixed thing and something that we need to adapt to. When we think about why this might be problematic and why we might think and need to develop approaches that include different kinds of actors, then there are a number of very different research streams and arguments around why it is important that people in the everyday also understand that their perspectives, their lived experiences are equally important when it comes to the ways in which futures are being built and constructed. The late John Urry said that who or what is able to claim the future is an exercise of power and a matter of social justice. Richard Tutton has spoken about futurelessness. Others have spoken about feelings of impotence and resignation in the face of these very dominant narratives and discourses. You've probably seen that meme before about the broligarchy. So that there are very powerful state actors and tech actors that determine what the future might and will look like. And in the face of those kinds of projections about the future, many feel left out and many feel resigned. What we do in Graz is that we've just recently founded the Graz Socio-Digital and Participatory Future Studio, in which we perform and create participatory research about people's anticipations and anticipatory regimes, so the kinds of things that people anticipate the future might hold. We do that with different social actors, civil society organizations, community organizations, government, schools, through sustained engagements in order to imagine and co-create more inclusive and equitable socio-digital futures or desirable futures. This is the team. And I have brought two examples of the kinds of work that we do, and then I'll close with that. So these are workshops that we do with young people and pupils, which are called futuring workshops, in which we think and imagine a thing from the future, and then have the pupils design these speculative objects. So here we have a climate dress, for example, or we have a robot. And then through these speculations, we can start talking about the kinds of anxieties that they have in relation to digital technologies and the ways in which they structure their everyday and the ways in which they experience them, but also the hopes and the values that are important to them. The second example that I've brought is from a research project that we conduct with older women. You can see them all here. It was a series of workshops with 14 older women in Graz and colleagues from the University of Bristol, Helen Manchester, Steve Simons from the University of Sussex, and Ren Aldrich in the front, who's also a doctoral researcher in my studio. And what we've tried with these kinds of workshops was not just to use speculative methods, because what we've also in the school workshop see is that when you do speculation, very often the frames of reference that people and participants use in those workshops are basically limited and bounded within the anticipatory regimes or the anticipatory practices that they already have around the futures, be it technological frames, but also, let's say, social external factors that determine how society will develop. So what we are doing in that project is to experiment with arts-based methods in order to find alternative resources for the imagination and to consider what it is that is desirable, and in that case, what is desirable for older women as they age. And these are just two examples from some of the workshops that we've done. So we've had a series of workshops. These are body maps that we've drawn with participants after we visited a showroom for German technologies, so age tech that is being developed for older adults. And rather than just critiquing the ways in which these technologies frame older adults and their bodies as frail, as dysfunctional, as in need of a techno fix, we were trying to have bodily reactions and emotions about the kinds of ways how they feel vis-a-vis those technologies, but also what kinds of emotions and feelings emerge through their own experiences of what they wish aging would, what kinds of aging they would prefer. Another thing that we've done, and that's just one of the recent outcomes, is a tarot card set based on monsters collages that we've done, which we've then used in futuring workshops to think about the kinds of things that are important for our participants and could be guiding in thinking about how alternative digital futures might look like. And with this, I close, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much for 3 wonderful presentations. I think we already see that there are striking differences depending on the place. You can come forward, please. And the actually situatedness, right, of the technological practices, but also our own positionalities. Given the time, we thought we might actually open up the discussion right now, because we could imagine with these thought-provoking talks that there are also questions and comments arising. Maybe one question for the beginning. So we know, like in SDS and many other fields, right, the technologies and the political orders and the social practice are co-emerging, right? So I was wondering how much the socioeconomics plays in that. So with countries that, or generations that have a feeling of, I will have it sort of better than my parents had it, because in Austria and many other European countries, now there are the first generations that are actually facing a future that might be less wealthy than the ones of their parents. So that might be the other way around. I don't know, it's an open question. And how far that also plays into the perception of the future as such, and the technology is sort of embedded in this kind of future. So it's hard to disentangle, of course, I know, but I would just be interested in your thoughts on that, and then I would like to open up.
Yeah, so I think, thank you, Astrid, for the question, because I think class has lost its fashion, right, in academia and elsewhere. Like, class used to be a construct that would architect a lot of our argument, and then it became more for identity, and identity became about race and ethnicity and gender, but class went lower and lower because it just lost its fashion, right? I mean, there was a lot of writing for like the last decades up to the 80s and maybe early 90s, but socioeconomics is one of the still most powerful tools of architecting and rethinking the sort of synergies between even the north and the south, because like Saskia Sassen talks about, say, global cities, right? Actually the elite in Mumbai and Mexico and New York have a lot more in common than those who are at the margins, whether you're in rural Netherlands or in a poor part of Texas or whatnot, right? So class actually does do a lot, but what's interesting for me is the notion, the mindset of pessimism actually intuitively you would think should go along with those who are in the low socioeconomic group, because you have a lot more to be depressed about. You're poorer, you don't have access, you're in spaces of deep constraint, you're in a paternalistic society. So why should you be more optimistic than those who are much more resource, gifted, right? And actually, it is about those who tend to be much more saturated. There's this perception of loss. I mean, look at the Americans. The Americans ranking consistently in the lowest in their notions of how they see the future, and that's partly to do with trust in their government, trust in this idea of the America that controls the world, and the reality that America has actually lost ground. A decade ago, Americans actually controlled much of the economy. They had power about 86% of, the control on the geopolitics. Now their impact is something like 46% because there's new kind of alliances being formed. And this is something which is actually very hopeful, that we are moving away from this power, even though it seems more all-consuming. And so there is a sort of decentering, there is a sort of a different structures, like I said, like the digital public infrastructure, which totally doesn't play by the rules of the game that is set by big tech, even though we're so obsessively, focused on that, but it's actually playing a completely different set of rules of the game, right? And so anyway, so long story short is, I think, yes, class is very influential, but what's interesting is it doesn't correlate with what you would think the ones who are on the lowest should be more pessimistic and the ones on the highest should be more optimistic. And this is what can bind the North and the South, is we can think in terms of solutions across borders to build a much more sustainable future,
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that there's neither the global south or the global north are homogenic entities, right? It's highly diverse entities, and we need to look specifically. Juliane, maybe a question to you too. What do you think a constraint, or what are the constraints of looking into the future more positively when it comes to socio-technical futures?
No, I think, does that work? Yeah. So I think, and yeah, I've only touched upon it in the presentation a bit. It's really these very strong anticipatory regimes in which young people or youth are also socialized. I mean, everyone lives, right? You can't live outside those kinds of anticipatory regimes. And the discourse for many of the young people that we work with we have worked with in Germany, but also in Austria, is a lot around insecurity and, well, as you've pointed out, a very pessimistic outlook on the ways in which technology impacts on our life. And that is then reflected also in the ways in which they imagine any kind of response and any kind of desirable or hopeful future, because it's always constrained within these anticipatory regimes. Annette Markham talks about discursive closure. And so you are really bounded in the ways in which you can imagine anything that happens, always within that kind of discourse in which you are socialized and in which you experience and through which you also make sense of your everyday life. And so for me, that was also quite eye-opening when we had in 2019 the Data Power Conference, and a keynote speaker, Nimi Ramavasani from Bangalore, who said, and she just framed the whole critical data studies discourse in such a different way and talked about data as livelihood, which is something that doesn't appear in the kind of critical data studies discourses that we have in Europe, certainly. And that obviously shapes the ways in which people who live within those discourses make sense of the future and orient themselves towards the future.
Yeah, that makes me think of Milan and Trere's call to de-westernize critical data studies, right? So to also pluralize the discourse. And you had some great references, Gilberto. So what do you think makes your participants motivated to have this more engaged and participative data narratives from below?
I think there's a lot of reasons, and maybe it's close with Payal just said, because it's new possibilities, it's new possibilities of future. We are passing through a time, an important time in Brazil, that is finally we get some policies of reparation. So we have more black people in the universities. We have more opportunities to people who lives in favelas to get opportunities to study, to talk about themselves, about anything. So there's some power construction that is not just that's not a gift. Of course, it's an history of struggle of social movements instead that is changing a little bit these ideas of what can we do to ourselves, you know. So I think when we propose let's dispute data, people says, of course it's not everybody. I'm talking about, people used to joke with me that is my people is the nerds from the favelas, you know, that people who wants to work with data science, with technology, with design, but they are there, you know, they are there. It's not a lot of people, but we have a good group, and I'm researching all the country, and I'm finding people, especially young people in all favelas from around Latin America that are interested in disputing data, you know, in disputing these narratives. So I think there's a lot to do, and there's a lot to a lot of reasons that put people on this kind of struggle.
Yeah, very interesting, because there's empowerment discourse is so strong there. Meanwhile, in Europe, we have a strong discourse of like being surveilled, not powerless actually, which is interesting to think about.
Yeah, and which is really problematic in a sense, because this feeling of powerlessness then really makes you like paralyzes you, as you said. So what we do need to find are more hopeful narratives in order to be able to also imagine something that is hopeful and preferable, rather than, well, obviously, so resistance is not enough and critique is not enough, right? Let's just say, has critique run out of steam? So what is it that beyond critique we can offer?
Yeah, where are points of intervention as well. So I would like to open now up, and there are many questions. I assume you were the first one. Is there a microphone? Yes. He will keep your microphones. You get to answer them.
Yeah, it was about 20 years ago. I read a book that changed the way I look at things. It was The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid by C.K. Prahalad. And by the way, I saw he was looking at you from heaven, and he was smiling during your presentation. In any case, Prahalad talks about all kinds of examples of how the innovation was taking place at the bottom of the pyramid. And I tried to do something back then, about 15 years ago, and it just did not take off, partially because of the arrogance, partially because of the ignorance. And it's difficult for me to be positive in looking at our attitude here in Europe. So I'm looking for some positive impulses from you. Thank you.
Yeah, you were, I think.
First of all, thank you so much. This was a very insightful session, and especially for Payal, I really appreciate a lot of the perspective that you brought forward. Also, as someone from Pakistan who has engaged with digital platforms in a very different manner, it is like nice to see that representation. And I think during your talk, I was also thinking about the uprisings that we have seen in Nepal and Madagascar and Indonesia, where the young people have used the same platforms to overthrow governments. But at the same time, in the same situations, they've also seen like internet shutdowns and bans and content moderation, like suppression of content through content moderation. The same thing we've seen in case of genocide in Gaza, that, you know, while there was this space for narratives to go out when mainstream media was not like talking about it, there was a lot of content suppression and content moderation as well that was happening. So my question for you is that in your framing that you talked about, I will read the book, I haven't, but from what I understood or what I got is that your framing is mostly on the utopia, the positive, the optimistic side of, you know, these digital futures. And my question is there a way to hold both the structural exploitation that you see on digital platforms and the self-actualization that young people are experiencing in the same narrative? And, you know, if not, Because I do have a problem with when one framing is always ends up overriding the other, because you do think that two things can be true at the same time. So while there is this, this dark, pessimistic narrative, there is also this good side to it as well. And for me, I sort of see it. But I don't know, I would like to hear if for you the two frames can coexist or not.
Yeah, would you like to answer? I think we have time to give.
Yeah, so firstly, thanks for bringing up Prahalad. Actually, I use him a lot in my book. And in fact, I worked on a project with, which was inspired by Prahalad, by Hewlett Packard, on this I community. Anyway, it was years ago under Chandrababu Naidu. But the ethos was, what was interesting for those who don't know Prahalad was, he was one of the first to tell businesses to rethink the global south in very different terms, because for the longest time people thought, oh, they're beneficiaries, right? So if you think the global south from the like post independence, for decades it was like, oh my god, there you go, they're like always needy, like they want something from Europe, want something from the US. He's like, no, actually they are markets that are scalable. And you would say, in today's terms, you're like, yeah, yikes, markets, horrible. But guess what, the majority of the world, they want to be seen as consumers, and we take it for granted because we always have been consumers, we always will be consumers. That's how it is. It's like being a consumer is a gift, because when you are treated like a consumer, that means you're catered to, that means your content is tailored to you. That means if you're a poor person, you don't have to pay 3 times more for the same product and service than, say, we do, pay, right? So there's a huge rural-urban divide in pricing. So what we found, including with, in today's terms, is that why are people in tier 2 and tier 3 towns using AI more? Because they realize that people are not actually going to ever treat them as consumers. So they become the entrepreneurs. They go on TikTok, they sell themselves in ways that can be seen and heard in their own terms. So while we are bashing social media, for them, algorithm is their friend, because it's a platform that, relative to their social constrictions by their governments, which are very autocratic, by the market, which is rigged, the algorithm is relatively much more liberal. And we really have to understand how that works, right? So thank you for bringing that up. And regarding your point, absolutely. Look, we all live within constraints. Like, for example, I can have aspirations to work, like have a family, and yet I want to have my own space. And this is what's being human. And in these kind of contexts, one of the things that we work a lot with civic organizations, massive budget cuts, like particularly in Africa, right? We know millions have been cut in the last 2 years alone. It's been brutal. And so AI has been a God's gift, because what would have taken, like, for example, Red Cross, 16 million volunteers they have, right? And their budgets have been like brutally cut. How are they going to train them? AI has come to the rescue because it allows it for multiple languages and dialects, and also upskilling, because these are, like in Sri Lanka, majority, 65% of volunteers in helping, particularly when the economy collapsed. And so Red Cross was able to actually help in their upskilling while they were operating, and it was a way towards them getting a livelihood. And so do people like that? And were they concerned about the privacy and the data? There's a lot of issues, because where does the data go? And, there's a lot of ethical issues of there's a lot of precarious data going into big tech and all of this. But we still operate based on what are the choices we have. And oftentimes we don't actually have legitimate choices. So we operate within these constraints. And yet the fact that you even have a possibility, like I talked about Starlink, right? Why Iranians will still appreciate it is because, relative to not being able to communicate with their family and friends around the world, and saying, okay, I don't want to touch Starlink because it's Elon Musk, versus having that connect, they will feel hopeful because they have that connect. So, and this is, again, the one thing I do hear again and again from civic organizations is that what we've done is put the burden of guilt onto them on top of an already burdensome reality. So talk to an average person in the civic sector, and they literally keep apologizing that they use big tech tools. And they're like, I'm sorry, I know it's extractive. I know it's like, I don't want to be on Twitter, but the survivors that I work with, they are on Facebook, or they're on WhatsApp, or they're on things. So what can I do? And I'm so sorry. And I'm like, we've got to stop. Unless you can, we've got to come up and work with them for solutions versus shaming them in work that they are doing in already difficult circumstances. And so this to me is really something that is, it's a moral imperative to hope, because we cannot put that on their shoulders on an already burdened civic sector in this time and age. So that's how I look at it, as surveillance of care as a proposition, where we watch over each other and not watch each other. And there's this, within the surveillance of capitalism, surveillance of oppression, there's also surveillance of care, and it is always going to be a tension. And I do believe that collective agency, you know, with a purpose, does actually move things forward, right? So we have to believe it, right?
Yeah, thank you. I think you said it in your presentation. It applies to us as well. I mean, we're very critical in debating, and then we're posting everything on LinkedIn nowadays, which is sort of the same, I guess. I suggest to take the next two questions or comments.
Okay, I'm not sure how to express what I'm thinking. I'm generally very optimistic about new technologies, especially I see the potential for neurodivergent people like me. But I also see the dangers of the people who are behind these technologies. And I, not long ago, started to engage with the ideas of these people behind the tech, big tech corporations. And the way you narrate this opinion you try to give us, promote to us, it reminds me of the technological republic. The key points are absolutely precisely showing where issues that really exist, or in your case, possibilities that really exist. But the narrative around it leaves out important background information and dilutes the picture. And I would like to know, are you aware that these people are against the capitalistic system? Do you know that Alex Karp, for example, the CEO of Palantir, openly claims he's a neo-Marxist? Yes, because you were pro-capitalism.
Thank you.
Hi. Your argument about first being fed and then have morals is very compelling, and I think we're overlooking the resourcefulness in the global south, particularly, to kind of engage with technologies on very different terms. I think your rally for hope is really something that we could take a slice of in the West. But I also think that, aren't we then running the danger of selling morals to utility, in the sense of, like, as long as the utility is being shown to be so effective, we don't have to engage with the moral question. So, and it goes a little bit to your question, that we need to kind of have a frame where we can say both.
right? Be resilient and still engage. And you said it, I think, quite well towards the end. It's a matter of choice. What choice do I have? And here the choice is the problem, right? So if I only can use Starlink to kind of connect to my family, then the choice itself is the problem, right? Well, I'm not saying that it's morally wrong to engage with Starlink in that situation. We still have a problem, and that lies in the choice. And I wonder how we can find a frame so that we're not losing this moral problem over making a case for the utility of digital technologies in our world.
I think that really nicely relates to a question I also initially had for the panel, and I will put it in now since I have the opportunity. What is our own role and responsibility as researchers and also research activists? What do we highlight with our own research? Now, what do we keep in the back? And what consequences derive from that, right? So I think since there is such a strong mainstream pessimistic discourse, sometimes it's needed, right, to push against, while at the same time not losing the ambivalences out of sight, right? So I think that is a really crucial question for us as well. So where put the finger, what to highlight in our own research and how? I think that's a question for all of you.
Shall I start? And I'll start and then, okay. I think one of the key learnings for me was also to highlight how we can think differently about technology. So that connects to what you've said earlier about science and technology studies. So understanding technology not as something that is other or outside of society, but something that is a sociocultural practice and that reflects a lot of the stereotypes, hopes, wishes, etc., that we wish for. And then to also start thinking radically different about what we understand technological innovation to be, because the ways in which we are taught tech innovation goes is usually through ideas around dominance, competition, effectiveness, etc. But if we look at feminist account of technology design and technological innovation, there are also other ways of perceiving of tech innovation. So there's this really beautiful essay by Ursula Le Guin, for example, about the carrier bag theory of fiction, where she talks about tech innovation as a matter of care. And so the first tool that humans invented was not something to compete and to hunt down and to kill, but it was a carrier bag to care for others and to collect things. And what I've seen in the workshops with participants is, and we've read it a couple of times, or also when I present that, is that people then start to say, oh, I've never thought about it that way, right? Because it becomes so naturalized that tech is always around competition and dominance that you don't even conceive of something that cares as something that could be understood as a technological innovation as such, and that it has value as well. And it doesn't need to be monetary value or something that allows you to perform better or compete better, etc. And so that's one of my key learnings, really, to turn the narrative also in terms of what we value and think about what tech innovation is and can be.
Yes, I want to tell two stories because I think it's good to help maybe with these questions, because it's look, the Starlinks arrives in Amazon in, I don't know, 2 years ago, and we, the civic society in general in Brazil, became very worried about it, but we didn't have a project for the connection in Amazon. So what started to happen was that people from Amazon start to launch new civic organizations to talk about the problem of Starlinks arrives in Amazon. And of course, it was very important that Starlinks arrives to Amazon because they connected people that want to be connected to do a lot of things, no matter now. But what I mean is, with this problem comes also new possibilities of discussion, new possibilities of what we'll do when we will connect ourselves in the global perspective. The other story is that we have in Data Lab, we have a project called Crypto Funk. It's a funk party, funk, Brazilian funk, to shake and dance and stay together and care ourselves. But all the program of the event is about cryptography, it's about security, not just digital security, but also physical security. So what I mean is, in the terms of what we are doing with these technologies, we also are funding new ways of live, funding new ways of think about technology. And for me, these two examples answer your question. That is, what we are trying to do at university as a participatory research is trying to convince our partners that what people are doing in Amazon with Starlink or without Starlink or in the favelas is launching another way of thinking, you know, trying to understand another way to make research, to make science, because these people are getting a lot of solutions for a lot of problems since ever. So what we are trying to do is, how can we connect these two worlds and even the state to trying to understand what we are living and fight against it.
I see two, also I see one hand in the back
Can I
right
respond
now.
to their questions, by the way, that they asked?
Pardon me?
I want to
Yeah, I thought we would collect the ones and then you have the final round.
Oh. No, because these two asked questions about...
Okay, quick answer.
Questions.
So
about the, you know, I hear you, and I think all of us, the reason why we are so anti-tech is because the face of tech right now is Palantir, and like actually all these punchable faces, right? Of course, I'm aware, right? I mean, in fact, my first book, the previous book, The Next Billion Users, opened the pathways, and I became like this Trojan horse into every big tech company because they thought I was going to deliver the data to them in 5 steps, right? And I was hoping to see a nicer side in the internal, but you know, there's usually, you know, well-meaning people who work in toxic systems and they're trying to do their change, but these systems of constraint still push them into a herd-like mentality, right? So I get that very much, but I also would like to emphasize that technology is always in the becoming, and that if we were to judge technologies based on who created them, we wouldn't be able to even use the railways, right? And like if you look at the legacy of railways, you know, they were one of the most powerful instruments of genocide during the colonial times, which was extremely extractive from the Congo to India, to a point where, imagine in those days, you would say, well, you really should not use the railways because they are instruments of really raping our countries, right? And so I see it as that we are repurposing, reclaiming, and we have to purge the origins in a way, and this to me is hope, that we can reconstitute these technologies. But I think this is, that's why I feel like we need to reclaim techno optimism, because unfortunately the big tech and, you know, these organizations like Palantir, etc., have taken over so much of our imaginary, and we have to take it away from them, right? And in response to your question about, you know, the legitimate choice, actually, I feel that you know, big tech, we focus so much on that, but actually there's so much happening, and this is what's frustrating. And it's not because we lack good ideas or they aren't interesting initiatives which should be funded. The problem is they don't get funded because as academics, we don't profile them, we don't platform them, we don't research them. They lack the spotlight. As like venture capitalists, like Canva is a great case in point. the founder of Canva, this young 30-something woman, she didn't get any funding. 100 people rejected her, right? She had to raise funding from her family and friends, and then they overtook Adobe and all that as a #1 creative AI tool. I mean, that's so hopeful, isn't it? So what I feel is like, and I see what's happening in Africa, and I'm going to South Africa in the next few months, where they are building, there's hundreds of interesting startups which are data light, agile tech, and they're really building for Africa, by Africa. There's so much energy, enthusiasm. Every time I step there, I was like, Jesus, the Nigerians are like on a cocaine of optimism, really. And I feel it, and I feel hopeful. And you know what we need to do? We need to give them money, resources, attention, and we need to aggregate them, and they're doing it anyway, right? They're bringing their limited resources together in this pan-African sort of unity, thanks to Trump, actually, because he's pretty much called them all shithole countries. So like, okay, instead of saying Nigeria first versus Kenya first, maybe we should work. Trump's like the best thing that's happened to the global South, because it's brought people together, which normally they were like, oh, India versus China or Pakistan. Now we're like, fuck, we are all, in a way, we should work together. And so to me, that's really optimism. And it's not because we don't have choices. It's just these choices are not revealed, and it's our job to start giving it the due attention so we can build genuinely alternative futures, not from nowhere, but from very much everywhere. It's happening. Just let's uplift it, and let's amplify it, and let's like move and change the rules of the game. So
Thank you. There is this one question in the back, and I saw some hand. No, that has vanished. Please.
So what I now would like to know, after after you have all analyzed optimism and pessimism, would be how you personally, you as people there in the front, how you see the future and how you see technology. Are you personally thinking more in an optimistic way, or are you thinking more in a critical way?
That's a beautiful last question. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
So I thought that I just need to take action and I need to take a stand, and that's why I've decided to found this studio. And it's not a lab because we are not experimenting on people, but I really want to build with people in a very, in a place. So it's not going to move, but it's there in the city. And we are building alliances with different actors in the city around the things that that concern them. And I think that's the only way forward to really enable change and to bring change forward. So I hope it does contribute to a more positive outcome eventually, and a more, as I said, desirable future in the long run.
Well, I'm an optimistic person, of course. I told you the things that I've been doing in my country, in my place, to try to bring more people to this idea of face the problems, face the violence, understand the problems, understand the structures, and not just fight against it, but also imagine and produce another possibility for that. So I see the future as this time of catastrophe, of violence, but also of hope, of love, of a lot of knowledge that we are organize ourselves, especially in this place that is more vulnerable. So that's it.
And yeah, I think that's a beautiful question. My optimism. So actually, I should just troll you and say, no, the next book will be from Promise to Pessimism sequel. Anyway, no, no, but my optimism doesn't come from my own experiences. It comes from my family in India. My mother was, left by my dad in her late 60s. So she's now in her late 70s. And she has a lot of pride. She's living alone. and she uses AI for everything because she doesn't want to ask the neighbor and bother him for the 100th time about how to do this and that. And now she uses ChatGPT for everything, and it maintains her dignity. And she's very proud of that. And my sister has MS, and she lives by WhatsApp. And I know that it's so fundamental to her mental health that I can't not be optimistic about technology when it is used in ways that are genuinely self-actualizing, and actually it's a line between despair and hope, and that's what keeps them going, which keeps me going.
Thank you very much for all your contributions and the wonderful panel, and also the contributions from the audience. Thank you very much. There will be